everyone. Welcome to Jenny's interviewing show, Jess Hands. This is my father, David Hannes.
Yeah.
And this is my uncle, Peter. I will be interviewing them on where they were during 9/11. I'm going to start with my uncle, Peter. So much fun.
You want to speak up?
Sure. Anyway, question 1. Where were you on 9/11?
I was living with my parents. That's Grandma Hannes and Ed Hello Hannes. David was living in an apartment I had. So it was both in Great Neck, New York. And you want to know about 9/11?
Yes.
It happened in the morning, and I didn't wake up until maybe noon, I'm guessing. And I had no idea what happened. I turned on the TV and then I found out. And all I really remember was seeing Giuliani and Hillary Clinton walking down the smoke-filled streets. I think they had masks on.
Probably.
And I don't really remember that really much other than that.
What were you thinking during 9/11? Scared?
It was hard to believe what happened, really. It's not exactly the kind of thing you'll expect. So I don't know, okay, David, you could take over.
Okay.
Everyone give a round of applause to Peter Hannes. Moving on to my father, David
Okay.
Hannes.
Mine might be a more extensive story.
All right, so question 1. Where were you on 9/11?
All right, 9/11, I lived in Peter's apartment. Peter lived with my grandmother. My grandmother needed some comfort care, and my uncle was living with her. My grandfather had passed a couple years before, and I was across the street from a train station, about 30 minutes away from Penn Station in the middle of Manhattan. So it gives you an idea of where we are. Now, Great Neck, New York is on the border of two counties between Nassau County and Queens. So it's fairly close to New York, enough so that if I drove down a road called Northern Boulevard, there's a point in Northern Boulevard, you get to the top of the hill and you can see the Twin Towers in the distance. And they kind of look like that from that far away, but you're close enough that you feel connected to the city. So this was on a Tuesday, 9/11, and it was a great Indian summer morning. Weather was great, there wasn't a cloud in the sky, it was a perfect blue sky day in December. And I was going to graduate school at the time in Manhattan, and I had the day off. So I was just waking up in the morning, and typically in the morning I would have the news on in the background on the TV, and I would listen to Howard Stern, who's an adult radio show host on the radio. And I'm cooking my breakfast and my Pop-Tarts are there and the news is on in the background. Howard's talking to Robin Quivers, his co-host, about Pamela Anderson, who was at the moment of time the most beautiful woman in the world practically. And then they stopped for a second and they went, "Oh, what's that?" And they said, did a plane hit the building? And you could hear their conversation in the background. And then I turned to the TV, and sure enough, there was a big hole with the smoke coming in. But outside of it being an oddity, did something hit the tower of one of the buildings? I went back to what I was doing. The TV was still on silent in the background. Howard went back to talk about Pamela Anderson. And, in between, it was kind of like, wow, it's going to be weird to see this big hole. Then about, 20 minutes later or so, you see, another blowing up explosion in the building. And about 10 seconds later, you see in another angle, an airplane crash right into the other tower. We're like, is that another plane? We're like, holy moly! But they didn't say holy moly. And you realize right away that plane purposefully crashed into the second building. That this was no accident, and it was not a small little propeller plane. It was a big jumbo jet. Boom, boom, crashes in, and suddenly everything changed. And Robin and Howard and the crew on the radio show they're all about, oh my God, we're under attack. And you realize right in that moment, New York is under attack, and terrorists are flying airplanes into the buildings, and that was crazy. So now I'm turning the news on. I'm also listening to Howard Robin on it, and just doing wild bewilderment, and you see both buildings are just covered of smoke, and this goes on for about 15 minutes or 20 minutes or so, maybe a half an hour. And in the meantime, I'm more focused on the news, and I'm switching different channels. And keep in mind, this is back in 2001, and you had your CNNs, but you also had the local news. Because I lived in New York, I got real local news, Channel 11, WPIX, local news interviewing New Yorkers. And by the time a half hour passed, you had a lot of people that left the buildings and came downstairs, slowly but surely left the buildings. And what you had at that time was one lady who left one of the buildings, maybe building 1, was being interviewed about what she just experienced. And she was telling a story to the local reporter about how she's a screamer, and she was like, ah, when she first heard this, and she might have scared her colleagues. And then the lady interviewer said, well, can you give us an example? And the screen went gray, and you heard, ah! And yeah. And then as the screen left the gray, you start to realize, wait a second, where's the building?
I have a question.
Yes.
When the screen went gray, did the news stop?
No, the local news reporter was interviewing a woman who casually came down from the top of the building to the bottom of the building 30 minutes after the plane crashed one of the buildings. She's being interviewed by the lady, safe and secure at the bottom of the building. You could see in the background or the tower, and she's just being interviewed like I'm being interviewed right now. And then the screen went gray. You heard a rumbling, and as the smoke cleared, and I've never seen this video again because it's not on CNN or MSNBC or other channels. It was WPIX New York. Never seen it twice. The smoke cleared, and just as clear as you could see Jacob in the background, you can tell there's no building anymore. And it's like, oh my God, the building crashed. And you realize right at that moment, and when she's screaming and the things are clearing, and from the view I had watching on TV, that the building just disappeared. Tower 1 just came down. Now, at that moment, I decided to grab my portable radio that I had in the bathroom, and play Howard Stern, go upstairs to the top of my building. I had an 8th-floor building, and typically it's locked in the top, but I knew the custodial agent or the assistant custodial agent at my apartment, and he let me into the top. So there's only like 3 people at 9:30 in the morning at the top of my building. And from the top of my building, you can see New York City in the distant background. And the tower would look like this, and most buildings would look like this. And you're looking out there, and all I see is one lone tower standing and billowing smoke going out toward the Hudson River, and just billowing out there. And it was it's a crazy thing to see. And Howard and Robin still playing on the radio, and I'm just standing there stunned with the other person that let me up and a couple of neighbors. And I just stayed up there. And at some point about, 20 minutes later, 15 minutes later, I turned around, and then I heard a rumbling, and I looked back, and I could see Tower 2 crumbling down with smoke billowing out in the distance about 30 minutes away. And it's like, oh my God, Tower 2 just fell. And the smoke just goes across the city and then outwards toward the water. And I was just thankful that the wind was blowing southbound, and it wasn't blowing all of that smoke and debris in toward the city, because there was a lot of it. It was just a crazy looking scene. And that's where I spent the better part of the next couple hours. It was up at the top of my apartment building, outside, looking down at disaster that was 9/11. And I had the radio, and Howard was starting to go to the affiliates, I think at CBS. So you're getting the news on the radio with their commentary by the radio crew that I usually listen to. And at some point, you heard, that's right, you heard that the Pentagon had got attacked. Uh, between the first tower crashing and the time that the second tower went down, something else happened. So the first building got hit by the first plane, the second building got hit by the second plane. You knew you were under attack. But then, shortly thereafter, you got a report that another plane crashed into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. At that point, I ran into the other room and got on what's called AOL Instant Messenger. It's like the precursor of what you guys use to chat today. And it went to my dad, who was working in White Plains, New York. And I was like, Dad, we're under attack. He's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, the Pentagon just got attacked. We're under attack. And so I was communicating with my dad that way. Yeah.
Did your dad know about 9/11 at the time, or did he not?
I don't think he knew when the first building fell, really what was going on. Maybe he did, but he sure didn't know about the Pentagon. So when I think he knew that 9/11 happened, I came in and ran into the room when the Pentagon got attacked, and I ran in and I said, Dad, the Pentagon got attacked. So I'm the first person informed about the Pentagon. He's sitting in a cubicle somewhere in White Plains, New York, working for Verizon Wireless, I think. Doesn't matter. Shortly after that, there was the interview with the lady. The building fell. Ran upstairs to the radio. I spent the rest of the day up there. And at some point, it took a long time. I looked around the sky. Again, clear blue day from my apartment. You could see the whole skyline in New York. And I'm like, where are all the military planes? We're being attacked. There's no military jets. It took a real long time to see the first flyby of the first military jets coming and flying zoom into Manhattan. And I thought that was odd. But then you got a report on the radio that I was listening to that there was another explosion in Pennsylvania. And you're kind of looking out in the distance trying to see whether you could see the explosion way out there in Pennsylvania. And I'm like, is that right over there? Is it not that right over there? You didn't know. And then you start hearing about possible other engagements of terrorism. Did a plane get taken down in Chicago? These planes haven't come in yet and landed. Maybe those are going to get it. We didn't know that it was just going to be, 4 planes, 2 in New York City, 1 at the Pentagon, and the other one, Flight 93, where the passengers grounded the plane before it could hit. I think it was the Capitol they were aiming at, because there was more nasty business involved. But we didn't know. I mean, we thought maybe the whole country was getting attacked at the same time. And the only thing I could think of when I was up there during the extensive period of time was 2 things. One, but I knew I was safe, because the terrorists aren't aiming at attacking Nassau County or Queens. We're not under target. They're going after big targets. If they're going to attack something, they're going to attack Manhattan. They're not going to attack Queens, I don't think. So I felt safe where I was, but you felt very uncomfortable about everything else. And that was the initial engagement with 9/11. Now at night they had a vigil, and all the residents of Great Neck got together at a candlelight vigil, and the sentiments were twofold. One was just this shock and awe about what happened. The other one was people were about what happened. And the one thing you could say about New York is you might have thought, wow, this is too scary. Let's get out. Let's leave New York. Nobody wanted to leave. It was like, we're staying right here and standing our ground. It was weird. You couldn't go into the city from train. As I mentioned in the beginning, I lived across the street from the train station. That's how I got to and from Manhattan. And they wouldn't let anybody go into New York from the train for 9 or 10 days. And then once they did allow that to happen, people were on high alert, because my train went into Penn Station, and across the street was the Empire State Building. Nice large target for terrorists. And we didn't know if they were going to come back again. We didn't know anything aside from the fact that bin Laden was involved. And we knew about bin Laden because he attacked overseas, targets of the United States overseas a couple years earlier. So his name was a known. But I went into the city to go back to school and go back to work. I would carry a laptop case, and in it I had an emergency supply kit, and it had like a glow light stick and a particle mask and iodine capsules. Because in case there was a dirty bomb attack in New York, if you take iodine, it can protect you from radiation, from the aftermath of a radiation attack from the dirty bomb. And people were concerned about that. And the weird thing about entering Manhattan is the National Guard is there, and the United States Army was there. So you'd walk through Manhattan, and you'd see, Army guys all over the place in camouflage, and you'd see pictures everywhere, missing pictures of everybody's loved ones who were missing after 9/11. It's a really, somber, surreal thing to see, plastered everywhere in the city. Have you seen me? Have you seen me? Of the victims of 9/11 and the attacks, and that was surreal to see that every day, the military and the loss. And what I also recall about that afterwards, and it's tied to baseball, is at the same time all this was happening, the world champions of baseball were the New York Yankees. And they postponed baseball for a bunch of days, but then normal life resumed. So they resumed at the end of the Major League Baseball season, and that was absolutely surreal, because you have to understand the people that worked at Ground Zero on 9/11, the 9/11 first responders are also, regular average Joes and Yankee fans. You see, that as their place of solace. They come into Shea Stadium, Yankee Stadium. And there would be this real coming together moment of, we stand our ground, we're going to go on with our daily lives. And there was, and the Yankees were this like shining beacon of light and life as they went about going on this really good run to the World Series. And they were all tied together. There's a good video about that called 9 Innings from Ground Zero, about the Yankees playing through the playoffs and what was happening at Ground Zero and 9/11 at the same time. And back then, Rudy Giuliani wasn't really involved in politics. He was Mr. American Mayor, so he was heavily involved in all of this. And there was a coming together moment that Peter mentioned, where Hillary Clinton, who is one of the big Democrats in the Democratic Party, Rudy Giuliani, which is a big headliner in the Republican Party, it was a coming together moment, and people would drive around in their cars with American flags. And the political climate today is not great. Everybody's kind of like in their own corners, but everybody got together. Everybody was together. We were all one United States, and everybody was flying their flags and showing great unity together. We were one nation together dealing with this, and it was politics free in the beginning, and there's something nice about that's been lost in the last 20 years. Silver lining of a terrible event, but there really was a coming together afterwards. Now, I wear this hat right here is my New York Yankees NYPD baseball cap and FDNY baseball cap. And if you notice, there's yellow letters and there's red letters with the New York in the middle, and it represents the police department and the fire department. The reason why we celebrate the police department and the fire department is that these first responders, while everybody was running away from the towers, as the towers fell, they ran into the building to try and save lives. And a lot of firefighters and a lot of police officers that would run up the buildings as they were on fire and under attack died when the towers collapsed. A lot of police officers and a lot of firefighters. So this is a cap that I wear in memory and in honor of them, in celebration of some very, very brave first responders that ran towards the towers in the aftermath of the terrorist attack. Something else I kept. This is the paper from the day after 9/11. This is the New York Times. This is the New York Daily News, also one of the local papers in New York. So this is the day after 9/11. And this is the New York Post, the day after 9/11. And maybe I'll let Jenny bring it to school. but every page in this is about the aftermath of what happened the day of, in every aspect. There's a lot of history in this, so I kept a bunch of the papers that happened in the immediate aftermath, bless you, of what happened. And this is 2 days later, and it shows they found a flag of one of the fire station fire engines, and they raised the flag at ground zero. A symbolic gesture that says, we're still here. We are alive, and you cannot beat us to the terrorists. That was one of the main terrorists that took down one of the towers. And yeah, that's my 9/11 story of what happened that day. And when you kids are older, you may one day want to try and find on YouTube or other means Howard Stern's 9/11 radio broadcast, because it's uninterrupted, there are no ads, it's live for 3 hours, a real blow-by-blow time capsule of history of what happened that day. And I remember quite well. Every time I listen to that, it takes me right back to that day, because I was listening on the radio the entire time, the first 3 hours after 9/11 through the Howard Stern show. So that's my story.
Everyone give a
Can
big
you
round of
repeat that?
Which part?
The entire thing.
It's right there. It's right there for you.
I think we can all give a big round of applause to David Hammond.
Yay! And to those first responders, those are the real heroes that day.
I would ask you if you saw the whole thing, but I think we already know that.
Saw the whole thing.
What
Well,
were you thinking when you saw?
that's a good question. Two feelings. I was really angry, and at the same time, it was the most exciting day of my life. It was the most exciting thing I've ever seen in my life.
Why was it the most exciting day of your life?
Nothing comes close as far as a moment that shakes you. It's tragic. It's the most tragic thing outside of a parent dying or a friend dying. That really is top of the heap. But I didn't lose anybody that day. I was fortunate. I didn't lose anybody that day. Everybody I knew was in Long Island or in Connecticut. And I had the day off, and where I went to school. I went to school on 21st Street and 7th Avenue, and that's blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks away from the Twin Towers. Empire State Building is a good deal of distance away from Ground Zero. I didn't lose anybody, but I felt safe up on my rooftop. I felt insecure every day thereafter getting onto the train, because there was the talk about maybe having dirty bomb attacks in Penn Station or Grand Central Station, but you just go. You do what you need to do. Or even maybe there will be a terrorist attack at Yankee Stadium. I went. I went. I saw Mr. November's Jeter game. That was 2001 right there. But it was the most exciting thing I've ever lived through, and the most tragic, simultaneously. And that's how I felt that day. It was a crazy day.
That was one story.
That's my 9/11 story. All right. Jenny can edit out whatever she thinks she should edit out of that.
23
Goodbye, everybody.
minutes.
Goodbye, everybody.
Goodbye.
Bye.